coming to listen to this talk. And I hope you can all hear all right. And can you see me yeah, good. Okay. So my name's Robert Good, and I'm an artist based in Cambridge. And what I wanted to do today was to share a little bit about my art, but also about some experiments that I've been making in Python programming. And so I wanted to share in a non-technical way some of my experiments and where I've got to. And it's kind of work in progress, so I'm intrigued by your thoughts and feedback at the end. And if you've got any comments, then I would be very interested to hear them. So, but I didn't want to hide behind PowerPoints the whole time. I'm going to run some code in a little bit, but I wanted to start out in a kind of analog way, as if I had a little exhibition here of stuff to show you, because I'm interested in words and texts and language and books and the ways in which knowledge has moved from the printed page to the internet. So this is Exhibit A. Don't know if you can see that, but that is a collection of Pelican books, and this is something that I'm really interested in, is the whole Pelican imprint, because they were started in the late 1920s, so about 100 years ago, and they're like a proto-internet in some ways. There are about 2,000 of them, and they cover everything. They're kind of knowledge for every man, and they have things like, so we've got the first, 30 odd here. I've got practical economics, the mysterious universe, the inequality of man, the growth of civilization, social life in the insect world. So pretty well whatever you could possibly want by way of knowledge, these books are the ones for you. And so you can have all sorts of different things. Particular favourite of mine, How to Be Happy Though Human. And sometimes I think that, well, pretty well there's a book for everybody. So maybe the book for me would be Language in the Modern World. So I like to think of those as a starting point. And a lot of my art was based around working with them, but not in a kind of way, not in book art sort of a way for the formal qualities of books, but for the knowledge that they contain. So, for example, and I appreciate you can't really see these properly, but I in a way that's part of the territory, isn't it? That's part of the deal. So these are little portraits, Pelican portraits that I made of some of the authors, and they're all exactly Pelican book size. And on the back of the each of the book, there's an author profile. And of course, they're all very dated now, and they're very of their time. But of course, with books, they are very authorial. You have these people who are kind of experts in their field, and they are writing the established text, and those are the words that then become the canon for the next foreseeable future. So we moved from this physical, authorial, analog way of looking at the world and knowledge to the internet, which is kind of Wikipedia, which is fast, it's very universal, but it's not as reliable may not be the right word, but it's a different flavour of knowledge. This is another example of a kind of book-based art. Can you see these all? Can you see them all right? So this is called Thinking About Thinking. So this is a book called Thinking About Thinking, which is a fantastic title, I think. And of course, it's all about trying to make sense of things. So I decided to kind of cut it up and put it on a little Rolodex, and all the different snippets from the book, you can just take your pick as you go through and see little bits of thoughts about thinking on your Rolodex. So you can take a book and really break it down into its constituent parts. One more to show you. I don't know if you can see this one, really. This is called Problems of Philosophy, and it's very tactile. It's a book. This one's actually David Hume, An Inquiry Concerning Human Understanding. You probably can't really see that. But I've really just wanted to deconstruct it, I suppose, and turn it into a little sculpture. So that's really where my interest started out, and you can't really get a flavour of that being over the internet, but it's that kind of tactile sense of the words and the physicality of the words and the way that they are being used in a sculptural way. Well, of course, knowledge has moved online now, and so much of it is more digital. And one way that I tried to explore the way in which that has changed was in a book that I did called A New Dictionary of Art. So art is a difficult word to define, and in the old way of thinking about things, you'd go to the library, you'd pick up a book and you read it, and somebody would tell you what art is and what art isn't. But of course, now that we've moved online, everybody's got an opinion, everybody is an author, everybody's got their own way of thinking about things. So I decided to collect as many definitions as I could from the internet of art, and I put them all into my own dictionary of art to try and create an alternative way of thinking about it. So there are about 3,000 definitions of art in this, and I probably won't try and read them all, but there are a few that I particularly like. Art. I don't know. I think there have to be boundaries and definitions. I hate how things are becoming more and more generalized. Art. I have no idea what fine art is and no idea what makes an image fine art. Art. I really don't care anymore. I've had nothing but hatred for the art community for a long, long time, and I don't care to join their ranks. Art. I woke up this morning and my pipes burst, completely filling my basement with art. I had such an emotional response to it, I didn't know whether to call the plumber or have an opening. So anyway, there's all sorts of different definitions there that are taken from the internet. So the flavour of the internet is very different to how things were in the age pre-internet. And that's where really things started to become, I started to think about automating things and programming things. So what I'd like to do now is show you a little few slides. If I can share the screen. Okay, can you see that, the Art of Python? I can't hear. Oh yeah, good. Susie's giving me the thumbs up. So I say lots of different manifestations of text in different ways, and I've done some typing, and I've had somebody do some sign writing for me, and I've done some murals and different ways of doing it. I came across this quote the other day, which I thought was quite a good way of thinking about it, or the way I think about it. As soon as we start putting our thoughts into words and sentences, everything gets distorted. Language is just no damn good. I use it because I have to, but I don't put any trust in it. So that's quite a nice way of thinking about it, or at least the way that I think about it. So I started out doing my dictionary, and it seemed to go quite well. And I thought maybe for a follow-up, I started to be interested in news headlines and the online environment, to say knowledge, what's happening to knowledge online, and the way that we're suddenly becoming deluged with 24/7 news. It becomes this onslaught of headlines that just keep on coming. And it's difficult, or it's easy to forget, rather, that only a few years ago people would just get their news maybe once a day via a newspaper or 9 o'clock news or something. Nowadays we're constantly overwhelmed by the amount of news that there is. So I started collecting these headlines manually every day during, I think it was 2019, 18 or 19, as material, as source material to use in some artworks. And one of the ways of doing that was to kind of create this immersive exhibition where I wallpapered the walls to feel as though you're kind of surrounded by the headlines themselves. I put them into a book which I call Breaking, and that was a kind of a first stage in thinking about the knowledge that we find online. So then I thought, well, I really wanted to have a go at maybe some sort of animations or some sort of work with them. And I've done a few animations before, just manually. Some of them are very simple like this. There's really not a lot to them. But at the end of last year, I decided with the 2020, the year 2020 coming up, I was thinking maybe I could use some of my news headlines to create a little animation that I did. And this is an animation. I hope it's going to run for us, or else I'm going to have to. Okay. So this is an animation that I put together called 2020 Vision. And it's all headlines that I collected from Google, and they all begin, what is the future of? And I wanted to get that sense of being overwhelmed by all the different possibilities that we're being bombarded by and that we're meant to try and make sense of. And we're meant to be experts on all of these things, or are we meant to be experts? How are we possibly trying to keep abreast of all the things that are being thrown at us? So I did this animation, but I did it all manually using Photoshop. So it was very laborious and obviously took a long time. So what I wanted to think about was whether or not there are ways in which I could automate that. It's time consuming, you can't easily change it, and it's analog, it's a manual process, and we're in the digital age. So I'm thinking to myself, well, maybe we should be moving towards a more digital approach. I don't know. It was an opportunity to find out. And I've actually got a background in programming from a previous life, and these were computers when I was programming, so it's kind of from the dinosaur age, and it's probably no exaggeration to say that, it's a cliche, but it's true. Our phones have probably got more computing power than there is in those things. But this was kind of very physical, very kind of brute force. It's a bit like old cars where you used to be able to fix them yourself, and now you can't. They're just these closed boxes. And that early example of PCs and so on. So I thought, well, maybe I could try and do some programming and see if I could automate some of these processes, and also to see what sort of results I came up with. So this was around Christmas time, and I started looking into this, and I came across, this is in New York, the School for Poetic Computation, which is fantastic. So there are places where people learn about computer programming for artistic purposes, the School for Poetic Computation. So I had a look there, and amazingly, they actually published all of their lectures and their tutorials and their how-to guides online. So I just kind of followed along myself. And I don't know if you can see, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but down at the bottom left-hand corner, it says Python Basics. Python is the programming language, and then further down the reading list includes Python Basics and a User's Guide to Determinant, which I think is rather good, and Artificial Hells by Claire Bishop. So it really was a kind of computing for artists. And I'm not going to go into all of the details, but really just to kind of give you a flavour of what's involved. So, for example, this was being an American course. They took Craigslist on the left-hand side, and if you very simply in your browser, you can see the code associated with Craigslist, and you can use that then to find the information that you need. And likewise, so I did the same with the headlines down the left-hand side. I looked at the code and I was able to extract the data. So it gave you a line by line, how do we translate this into Python and make it automatic? So I did that, and amazingly, it worked. This course was very good, and so very soon I had all of these headlines that I was spending half an hour a day doing by hand. I could just press a button and in 10 seconds I had all of these headlines. But of course, the question is then, what do you do with them? And that's where then I decided to see how I could reformat them and maybe make something of them. So now I'm going to try and show you what I have done with them. I'm going to have to stop sharing for a second, and I'm going to have to power up my coding screen. Hopefully you're going to see that. So I've got a few examples here just to give you an idea of what's involved. Can you all see that? Is that all right? Again, we're not going to go through all the code. I'm not trying to show that, but so for example, this one here on this line here, you can see you've got 26 lines of code, and if I run this code, he says, I can find my cursor. Susie's image is in the way of where I have to press run. So hang on a second. Let's see if I can run it from here. Okay. So I'm just running the code now. I don't know if you can see at the bottom, unless it's there are all the headlines. I'm just running the code now. Look there, it's going through at the bottom, and there are all the headlines just coming out. So from 20 lines of code, you can get the headlines, and they're there for you to use. So it's very simple, but also it's very magical. I think one of the things that is easy to forget is just how amazing technology is. And I know that's a cliche as well, but it's really true that you know, we have all of this. It is a real marvel that all of this stuff is just there for it. So what did I do with it? Um, Susie's in the way again. Sorry, Susie, it's not your fault, but the way the screen is set up. Okay, so here is the animation that I did before, but this is my automated version. So this is my what is the future of using the headlines. So I animated it just as a way of doing it. But then I realized to myself that actually uh, um, I've been collecting all of these headlines since the start of the year. So I had a collection of all the headlines to do with the coronavirus as it's been going through. And I thought actually this is going to create its own little diary of what's been going on. So if I just quickly, good. So this one is a diary of the evolution of the virus. All of these are the headlines from the virus. I'll let it run for a few minutes and then I'll talk again. So I'll leave it for a second so you can have a look at it. So I wanted to get a sense of it gradually becoming more and more like a petri dish with kind of viruses multiplying across the screen. So gradually it becomes more and more invasive, a bit like the virus itself. And these headlines are just kind of keep on coming at us the whole time, and we're kind of bombarded with them all, and we can't really, how are we going to make sense of them? And it does feel overwhelming at times, but the program is designed so that eventually it will start to decay back down to zero. And I'm hoping that as the course of the virus itself plays out and we get more positive and more optimistic headlines coming as we move out of lockdown, that the arc of the headlines and the arc of the kind of the sense of the narrative of what's been going on will move from the kind of dire stage to hopefully a more optimistic stage as we come out the other side of the virus. But we shall see. But in the meantime, I'm able to kind of continue to record all of those and to feed it into my little program to share that. Okay, so I wanted to show you another one that I've been doing. More of like an old school Vidi printer. I'll just let that run for a couple of seconds. Okay, so you get an idea of that one, and I'd quite like that one just to be kind of running in the corner somewhere in on a screen, and it would just be kind of constantly interrogating the internet and returning different results as it finds them. And there are all sorts of different texts that you can generate for that. So that's that's like a prototype of something that I've been looking to do. Okay, so wanted to show you a couple more examples, and then we'll see if they've got any questions. So this is something. I'm going to have to remind myself each time to share the screen. Okay, can you see that? That's my website. Good. So this is a project called A Monument to the Unread, and this is something that I did in Sheffield a while ago. And again, it goes back to kind of art and all the books that I hadn't read during art school, and my anxiety that there was all this knowledge that I didn't know. And I was never going to. I had to acknowledge to myself I was never going to know all of this stuff. So I wrote it up on the wall as a little monument, a bit like a kind of a monument to a kind of homage to it all. And then I spent the next week rubbing it all off. And there's a little clip of me starting to rub it off. I didn't realize just how long it was actually going to take for me to rub all this stuff off. But anyway, eventually I got there. But it's this idea of text and knowledge and the passing of time and the passing of knowledge itself and the way in which it can evaporate if we don't keep it in the present moment. So this was a project that I'd done, as it were, in an analog form in a gallery space, thinking about the passing of knowledge. And I had also done it as a follow-up. The next thing that I did with this, I did actually do an analog version, which I'm now going to have to share with you. I'm getting better at this, folks, slowly. Okay, so this is another version that I did. Again, this was by hand. This was a few years ago. This was by hand. This was every single cell was created in Photoshop individually. And it was, again, the idea of the books and these essays that were vanishing before my eyes. So this is an animation that I ran, and it actually runs for, I think, the best part of 2 hours, and it very, very slowly, the text decays before your eyes. And to begin with, you don't always notice it. You don't realize that anything's going on. Then suddenly you realize that a letter is missing. And then you realize that another one's going. And then suddenly they're all starting to disappear, but you don't always see where they're going from. So I'm obviously not going to run it for 2 hours, but you can see how, as it goes through, it starts to decay down. So I thought, well, maybe I could have a go at reproducing this using the programming. So I had a go at that. Can you see that one? Good. So I changed the text. I wasn't sure what text to use, and I'm still not sure that I've got the right text at all with this one. But this is a digital version of the same thing. I ended up I don't quite know why. I was looking around for some text, and somebody was talking about some of Shakespeare's sonnets, and this is a well-known sonnet. Well, I say well-known. It is a sonnet by Shakespeare, Sonnet 71, and it's all about mourning for the passing of time and memories and so on. So I did a similar sort of thing with this, and it's gradually disappearing before your eyes in a slow way. And this one I can't speed up, I'm afraid, because being a program, it just runs until it finishes. So I'll just leave it for a couple of seconds so that you get a flavour of it. Okay, so um, at that point, I thought maybe there are other options here. So I decided, I hope you can see that one. Um, and I decided to reverse the process. And instead of having them decay one letter at a time, I thought, well, I could make them appear one letter at a time. And that feels a little bit more optimistic. It feels a bit more like kind of springtime and the creation and blossoming of things. So it felt an altogether more optimistic approach to the same sort of idea. So I took a different sonnet this time, and this one is going to gradually appear. I don't know. Again, I haven't. I think takes about 10 minutes for it to appear, and I've speeded this one up. I'd actually like it to appear to reveal itself much more slowly and gently, but I've speeded it up a little bit so we get a flavour of it, and maybe we'll get enough to reveal itself before I close it down. But I'll leave this one for a couple of seconds as well. Okay, I don't know how well versed everyone is in their Shakespeare sonnets. I must confess I'm not particularly an expert myself, but you may gradually see that it's going to say, "Shall I compare thee to a summer's day?" And I thought that was quite a nice one because it's kind of optimistic and outward looking and sunny and springtime, which is where we are now. So. That's my little sonnet for you. I had one last project that I was going to show you, and then I'm going to say what I'm hoping to do next, and then I'll wrap it up for some questions, just seeing how we're doing for time. Yeah, about another 10 minutes. One more project for you, if I may. Okay, so this one is another project that started out um, in an analog format. Hope you can see that. And this is my billboard from a book called How to Know the Starry Heavens, which is this most magnificent um, book that I found in a second-hand store, all about the marvels of the universe and just the sheer bonkersness of it all and the absurdity of it and how enormously big it is and how incomprehensible it is. And it's a serious book in that it's an introduction to astronomy and the planets and the stars and the solar system, but it's written in a very poetic way and a very respectful way. You know, this is, I think it was 1910 or 1911, so again, another 100 years ago, and before people even knew about things like the Big Bang, or the Big Bang was not even a theory then, let alone we hadn't had Stephen Hawking or anyone come along to talk about black holes. But nevertheless, there was a real sense of wonder and about the possibilities and so on. So I wanted to try and do something with this text, and I took out a lot of the individual phrases that kind of seemed resonant, and I wanted to try and make them like kind of twinkling stars. I wanted it just to be very simple, white on black, and so we we ended up pasting this thing up, which was I tell you, it was a monster to do, but eventually we got there, and I think it worked okay. It was a strange place to be putting it on, but it was a fantastic project to be doing. And then, as part of the open day, I had a little pulpit there, and I did a little reading from the book, and with the starry heavens behind me. So this was a really nice project to be working on. But again, I was thinking in terms of text and maybe how that might work in a digital way. And so I had a little go at trying to do something with that. So I'm just going to show you what I ended up doing. Okay, so first of all, I did pretty well, much as I did before, which was that a kind of little reveal, a bit like the sonnets, and it's like the stars coming out at night, and it's exactly the same text, and I've done them deliberately quite slowly because I do like things that extend over a period of time. It's not that you're all going to sit here for 5 hours watching it, but over an extended period. The idea that you can't actually, unless you really do go and sit down, you know, with your sleeping bag and a flask of coffee to keep you going. You know, nobody's actually going to sit through the whole of this, but the fact that it can't all be taken in one hit, I think is quite appealing. So I like the idea of this gradually revealing itself. So that was a starting point to doing this. And I'll just show you how it ends up. Oh, before I show you how it ends up, this was a second go at the same thing. Um, where I chose a different approach where I had the whole array of the text, but as random characters, and it's gradually as it cycles through all the random characters letter by letter, as it hits on one that actually corresponds to a word in the final text, it stays on that. So gradually over time, this is going to reveal that same text that was on the billboard as well. And one thing as an aside, really, this is just a little techie point. You might see that occasionally the text moves left and right and seems to judder a little bit, and I have no idea why that's doing that. I can't seem to fix it. I don't know what's going wrong with it. On the one hand, I quite like it. It's like a glitch in the matrix. It's happening, but I can't control it. But it's also a good example of how I am self-taught and I know enough to get these things running just about. But when they don't run or when they stop working, I I I just don't know. I don't know what to do to fix them. So it's a very fragile knowledge that I've got so far, is what I want to say. But anyway, so this is, well, I find it quite mesmerizing, and over time this is going to reveal itself to you all. And I've done a final one, which is a short cut. So I'll give you a flavour of how it finishes up in about 5 hours' time. Okay. So this is the finished version with the same text on the black background. And what's interesting in this one is that unexpectedly it twinkles if you look carefully. Because I got the coding wrong. I kind of tried to do this to do a shortcut so that I'd get the finished result so I could show it to you, and I didn't. And I don't quite know how I've managed to get it to twinkle, but it is twinkling, and every so often one of the letters just kind of flashes on and off like a little twinkling star. So again, I quite like that as a possible display, and I'd be quite happy to see that projected onto a wall somewhere maybe, and just as an object of contemplation for people in a physical environment, or maybe on the internet. You know, it would be a nice thing for people to come across on the internet maybe, and just spend a little bit of time with it. Which kind of leads me on to the last bit of the talk, which is simply, well, what am I going to do with all of this? So the short answer is I don't know, but the slightly longer answer is I'm still trying to explore. I say it's still at the experimental stage, so I don't quite know what I'm going to do with it, but I'm looking for opportunities to share some of this. And one of the things that came across, or a friend of mine told me about, was this website called Sedition, which is for a platform for selling and collecting art in a digital format. Collect, trade, and enjoy artworks on your screens. And so there are all sorts of artworks here. And some of them are from very famous artists, Tracey Emin there, Jeremy Deller, and then there are all sorts of ones. So I'm thinking that maybe possibly some of the sonnets might be things that I might put up there, or maybe the Starry Heavens as a digital artwork and showcase it that way. So that's one possible option that I'm going to explore. Another one is the digital online environment. I came across this one the other day. Can you see that, Curator Space? Yeah, good, thanks, Susie. So this actually popped up only a couple of days ago, published 19th of May, digital artist residency. There's more and more stuff that's happening online, and some of it's obviously due to the lockdown and the virus, and it's a migration. It's a kind of a second best from a gallery environment to an online environment, but these are more deliberately digital environments. They don't exist in a physical format. They are platforms for digital artworks. And so this is an example of one that I came across. And again, potentially I could show some of my work there. So at that point, I think that is probably all I was going to share with you for now. I'd really like your feedback and comments if you've got them. There's my website. The only other thing that I was going to say by way of closing remarks is you'd be very welcome to get in touch with me via my website. You can email me down there. And also I've got a new little podcast called Something to Do with Art, which is now online at SoundCloud. So you'd be very welcome to take a listen to that if you would like as well. And I think at that point, Susie, I think that's probably all I've got, and you'd be very welcome to come in now with comments and feedback.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Robert. Any questions from anyone? I'm gonna do maybe do gallery view. Yeah, Barbara, you should be unmuted. You should be able to.
Okay, Robert, it just occurred to me watching your Starry Night, where your letters are going into a fixed position. If that's justified text, the juddering may be adjusting to the justification in the lines.
Yes, I think you could be onto something there. I tried to use a font that was monospace, so that it didn't adjust for that. I tried changing the justification settings. I think you're absolutely spot on. I think it probably is something to do with that, but I've tweaked several settings without success so far. But yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I'm sure. I think you could be right. Yeah, yeah. I'll send you the code and I'll let you have a play with it, and then see if you can fix it for me.
I think I'll hand it over to Simon.
Yeah, do. Yeah, he might be able to. Yeah.
Okay.
Any more?
Can you talk a little bit about art, language, location? Because you didn't mention.
Yeah, so Art Language Location is a collective that I started after leaving art school, and the reason for that was it was that moment when you finish art school and suddenly you get kicked out into the big bad world, and nothing happens unless you make something happen or unless you start hustling. And so I wanted to do an exhibition on text and language, and here in Cambridge there are not many places to exhibit. So the name of the game was to show works around Cambridge, text-based artworks in locations around Cambridge, and that's how it started. And we did that for several years, and on the back of that we've done other projects and exhibitions as well. And although it's kind of taken a bit of a back seat now, because it started, I'd say one of the motivations for doing it was because we were all leaving art school and we all wanted to get started and get stuck into something. And as we've now done it for a little while and got other projects of our own to do, we've kind of had less time or motivation. Maybe motivation's not the right word, but it's taken a back seat. But having said that, as and when opportunities arise, we've been putting in for various proposals and so on. So it's a project space and an art space and an art collective, really. That's and it's a way that I've met a lot of you who are here today. So it's a nice way to network in an informal way. If you start something, I think, that you're genuinely interested in, and you invite others to come along for the ride and for the journey, cliche alert, it is a really positive way of making things happen, I think.
Yeah, I think it's interesting in Cambridge because you can kind of do that in a way that maybe it's less accessible in a bigger city. That you can do fairly big temporary public art installations without too much in terms of, I don't know, would you agree? It's quite easy to kind of hustle your way into these amazing buildings that are just incredible to show in, or spaces that you just wouldn't even get a look in bigger places.
I think there's a lot to say on all of this, and it is a very interesting dynamic, because on the one hand, let's be honest, there isn't a big art scene in Cambridge, and there's not a big experimental art scene. There's Cambridge School of Art, which is great. There's Kettle's Yard, which is great, and there's Wysing and so on. But really, and partly that's because Cambridge being a small market town, there's not a kind of industrial hinterland where artists can relatively easily make work and show work. So the the downside is that there isn't a lot of art happening. The plus side is that anybody who does it's a novelty, and they've got the place to themselves, as it were, relatively speaking. The flip side with London, and so when we left art school, we all thought, oh no, we've got to all move to London because that's where it's all happening. But of course we couldn't do that for various reasons, or most of us couldn't do it for various reasons. But also talking to friends in London, the flip side occurs. On the one hand, you've got so many opportunities, which is fantastic. Everything on your doorstep. It's just incredible. But equally, it feels kind of like super saturated, and you do something, and it doesn't really blip. So it's big fish in small pond, or small fish in big pond, I think is how it is.
I
Maybe.
feel like art language education gives that kind of credibility to the individual artist that then they can then apply with a kind of organisation behind, and therefore you get opportunities to show in buildings or in spaces that you just like. My work was in that Foster building, which is
Yeah, I
like,
know. I know.
I
Well,
just sent an email and they were like, yeah, sure, you can paste your work all over our windows.
well, that is the other thing. Is it's amazing who will say yes. I mean, not everybody says yes, and a lot of people would say no. But it is surprising. You do get people who are up for it, and that's fantastic. And you get some really big surprises of people who say, yeah, okay, why not? And yeah, it's easy to lose track of that, and actually, it's easy to get bogged down in it turning to be quite an administrative task. But if you can keep it light and agile, then actually you can, put art in all sorts of different spaces, and it's all the better for it, really.
Can you talk a little bit more about your podcast? We've got Barbara here too, so it's kind of perfect.
Oh yeah, well, Barbara is my first podcast. Conversationalist. I don't like to say interview because I don't think of them as interview. They are conversations, I think. I was going to say victim. Sorry, the rustling.
Rustling was so good.
So it's a continuation of my interest in what is art, and the dictionary was about what is art and the possibilities for art. And what I wanted to do was to have conversations with people about why people make art. Why do we do all these bonkers things that we do, and what are we hoping to achieve by it, and what's really behind it, what's going on. And so that's what I wanted to do, and I started doing it before the lockdown happened, and I got 4 conversations in the can, which I've published. And I've got about another 8 that are slated, but I decided I didn't want to do them over the phone, because for me, part of the thing is to meet people in their space of creativity, and to actually, that kind of picks up on the space and the whole atmosphere of it. But maybe that will have to change if this continues for a long time. Then maybe and I know a lot of people have done podcasts over the phone and it's possible, but I just felt that I wanted to do it in person if possible, because that was part of the deal for me, is that I can then be nosy and go around to people's places and actually see what people get. You get a better feel for it anyway. So the idea is that it will be conversations with people about their artwork, and Barbara was the first person I had a conversation with. I don't know how you found it, Barbara, but I really enjoyed it.
Oh, it was fun. Robert approached me and asked me if I would be his guinea pig. He needed to practice. And I said, of course, because many years ago I did a project where I interviewed a lot of people. Oh, we deliberately did it over the phone. And the first person I'd interviewed was my nephew, who's a professor somewhere in some ecology thing. And I totally got that you wanted someone who felt safe to you and non-threatening to just try out the concept with. So I was quite happy to do it. But the thing is, I don't treat I came to art very, very late, so I don't have expectations or a driving need to prove myself. And I just found doing the interview really, really interesting in terms of thinking about myself and my motivation and why I might feel like that, and maybe why I should push myself more. So yeah, it was a kind of little therapy in a funny way. Yeah, it was really interesting to do.
Good.
It was great. I really enjoyed listening to it, and the chat about concrete. Really great.
Could I say something?
Thank you.
Yeah.
No, I was just wondering about you and technology, Robert.
Oh, yes.
which is the dog and which is the tail? Are you? I mean, you're sort of riding the wave and having to keep up in a way. Is that digital stuff devaluing your analog stuff, and each time? I'm just saying, you have to do it because it's there. How much are you driven by the technology?
I think, Rosemary, I think that's absolutely spot on, and I'm wrestling with that question myself, and I'm not sure I have an answer to it. I think maybe I don't need to do the Python, and I don't need to do the technology in order to comment on it. And so I'm kind of aware of it, and I think I don't really know what the answer is. It seemed like not a necessary step, but it seemed as though so my thinking was, well, I'm interested in the way everything's moved from paper to screen, and I'm doing all my work around paper, and I'm cutting up books and so on, but the conversation's all moved online, or rather I'm interested in that dialogue. So maybe I need to have a little toe in the other side of the fence, as it were, to see how it works on that side of things. So I really don't know. And I think I'm probably going to oscillate backwards and forwards. I think on the one hand, I think that this has kind of motivated me to do more paper-based, book-based work, analog work. And then I think also I want to maybe play around with making the digital stuff even more clunky or low tech, more like a kind of analog system. So I don't want to suddenly make it even more whizzy. But you're right, there is a temptation to try and keep up with it, and I'm never going to. I'm way behind still.
I mean, after a while, you become interested in stuff as old technology, don't you? So it comes back into its own again in a different way. So
yeah,
it's all a certain sort of thing.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting because also I think there's an aesthetic to the actual code itself. You know, when you see these black screens and you see these kind of the text that's laid out there in these different colours, and you know that if you run it, it does these fantastical things. There's an aesthetic around all of that. And I'm kind of thinking, for example, I'm thinking of maybe taking the code itself and turning it back into a book or something that doesn't work, just hopping backwards and forwards across that boundary, maybe.
Yes, I've always been interested in that sort of interface thing, yes.
Yeah. And in particular, for example, I mean, I'd be interested in people's feedback, because things like I've shown you projects like the Starry Heavens and so on that were originally paper-based, and turning them into a digital thing isn't necessarily better. It's just different, but it may be worse. I don't know.
Right.
Anyway, food for thought.
Definitely. Any last questions?
I guess I'm not even sure if I have a question. I've so enjoyed the interaction with you this afternoon, and I do have questions, but I'm sort of, I don't know how to explain myself. They're questions, but they're not questions. Susie, help me. I have so warmed to everything that you've talked about and you've said, and somehow I think if there was a way where I could actually explain myself to you privately, would that be allowed?
Of course. I was going to say I'm more.
Susie, is that allowed on this platform?
Of course, yeah. I can set you guys up a Blue Jeans link if you want, or I can share your details with each other, and of course.
I guess I'm so excited by words, and they enliven me, and they cause me to want to race forwards. But stuff that you said, they sort of they don't harness it. I don't mean that in a bad way, but they actually cause it to go in a certain direction. And I'd like that to happen with my thoughts.
Well, I mean, I'm very happy to have a conversation or keep the conversation going because that's all for me. That's all part of the deal is to kind of try and make sense of what you're doing. Well, you don't have to make sense of it, but you know what I mean. To kind of carry it forward and also to get some feedback because I can't stress this enough. This feels I've been doing it for about 6 months, but it feels still very much at the kind of prototype or the I don't know what I've got stage. And I remember that the dictionary, for example, I collected most of the definitions for the dictionary before I had any idea what to do with them. And it was about 5 years before I suddenly thought, oh, it's a dictionary, you know, and I'd displayed some of them in all sorts of different formats before that. And so it's a bit like that with this. I don't yet really know what, if anything, I've got. So, you know, all conversations along, you know, are helpful to me.
This excites me. Susie, can you facilitate this?
Yeah, I'll send you guys an email together if that's all right with both of you.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Robert. Thank you so much.
That'd be great.
Sitting here thinking, I love what you do. It's so totally different to what I do. But
Well, there you go. That's always an interesting.
that is so amazing.
Thank
I
you.
just
It's the loveliness of this platform.
Robert, can you? I thought of one last question. How difficult was it getting your books into places like the Tate, the dictionary? Was it very tricky?
Yes, the short answer is yes. I did do some talks on that because it's a whole separate subject really. But the short answer is it is a lot of work. Actually, it's a surprising amount of work. It's not hard. It's you know the usual things, persistency and having an approach and so on. And again, it took about a year's worth of effort. And the funny thing is, with the Tate one in particular, I finally plucked up. I waited until we'd got it in a few other galleries, so I could say, "Hey, look, it's here. You know, do you want to take a copy as well?" And I finally plucked up the courage because it's very rare to actually get the name of the person. That's the first thing. You've got to get. It's a real bonus if you get the name of the person, because otherwise you send it to kind of inquiries at Tate Modern and you just got no idea if it's fallen into a black hole and nobody's ever picking it up. And amazingly, I actually found the email address of the guy who buys for Tate Modern. So I finally plucked up the courage and I emailed him, and incredibly, within 30 minutes, he'd emailed me back. And sometimes you just never get anything. Within 30 minutes, he emailed me saying, "This is great. This is going to sell really well. I'm going to put it by the tills." And I think, oh, this is fantastic. 2 months later, nothing had happened. And I emailed him back and nothing happened. So finally, I actually sent him a physical copy, and then he did put it in the Tate. And so even when you get an email from someone saying, "I love it, and I called into the Tate and I asked one of the shop attendants, I said, sorry, the bookseller people there, I said, "Look, you know, just give it to me straight. You know, I had this chap tell me he's going to, you know, how long does it normally take?" And he says, "Oh, you know, it can be months." So it's really slow. And then even when they do take it, they'll say, "That's really great. I really love it. I'll take 5 on sale or return." So you've got to package up 5, you know, at vast cost for no money, and then, you know, wait 6 months and say, "Oh, we've sold 3 of them," you know.
Well,
So it's
just to sneak them in. I've got a friend who did that with their artwork. They just took their art to the Tate and documented it so it was in the Tate as a project.
yeah, no, well, I can attest to the fact this was, I don't know if it still is actually. Sadly, I'm not sure that it still is, but it might be. I don't know, but it certainly was for real.
Good. I'm glad. Any last questions? Everyone. Okay, thank you so much, Robert. We do this every time, and just give Robert a quick clap, please.
Thank you very much, and thank you for taking